Hello, everyone. As you're kind of filing in, my name is Stephanie Kissinger, and I am the head of community for Evolution. Welcome to Evolutionary Leadership Foundation's Session 3. Welcome back to those who have joined us before, and welcome to those who are new. We will get started in a couple of minutes here. We're just going to allow a few more people to join. And so just grab a coffee seat, grab a pen and paper, and we'll get started soon. Those of you just joining, my name is Stephanie Kissinger, and I'm the head of community at Evolution. Welcome or welcome back to Evolutionary Leadership Foundation's Session 3. We are going to get started in a minute or so here, so just grab a seat, get comfortable, grab a favorite journal and pen, and we'll get started. Yes, it's definitely eyeglass day. We all got the memo. So for those of you just joining, we're going to get started in a minute or so here. It looks like the roll-in is slowing down. So get comfortable, grab a journal, grab a pen, and we'll get started soon.
All right, thank you, Stephanie. Welcome, everyone. So let's start with a mindfulness practice. I will remove my glasses for this exercise. So find yourself in a comfortable position. Reminder that you may be listening to this as a podcast style, which is fine. If you're outside or you're walking, you can also do a mindfulness practice. If you're sitting in a chair, place your feet flat on the ground, feeling your feet touching the earth. If you're sitting cross-legged, you can feel your legs. If you're walking or standing, similarly, feeling into the sensations in your feet and legs. You can gently close your eyes if that's comfortable, or have them at a gentle gaze, maybe 45 degrees down. Sensing into your torso. Your shoulders and arms. Your head and neck, your jaw, bring your awareness to your breathing. You don't need to change it. Just bring awareness to the nature of your breath. Is it deep? Is it shallow? Is it up in your chest? Is it in your belly? And bring awareness to your interior. So that might be body sensations in your body. It might be your thoughts, noticing your thoughts, what they are, the pace of thoughts. Notice your emotional state. The subtle energies of your body and mind. Is there tingling, a swirling, smooth, rough, excitement, nervousness, whatever's there? Again, no need to change anything. And then bring your awareness to the exterior world around you. Any sounds, maybe the air on your skin, temperature. Any smells. And then even bringing your awareness beyond your immediate surrounding, adjacent rooms. If you're outside, widening your circle of awareness, even beyond to your entire community. And then returning your awareness to your own state. Your body state, your emotional state, the thoughts or stories in your mind. And when you're ready, you can, if your eyes are closed, you can open them. And as we've done before, you're welcome to drop into chat what you're aware of. Short little check-in. And as you're doing that, what you have just done in this mindfulness practice is a practice of awareness. And today's session is about self-awareness and the importance of self-awareness. And one of the propositions we have is that good leadership is predicated on self-awareness. And we'll go into that through some dialogue with Matt and me of what that means, and we'll have some opportunities for you to explore that. But when I think about self-awareness, there's many dimensions to that. And that can be the stories that drive us. It can be our state of being. I'm taking a look here at the chats. Yes. Inner and outer. Right. So Matt, maybe you can put the next slide up of just where we are in our journey. So in Evolution Foundations, we are in session number 3. And we started with the foundational principles, I, we, it, be, do, have. Last time we talked about human development and evolution. And today we're talking about self-awareness. So yes, so self-awareness is this journey of exploration, and the very practice of self-awareness is itself the road less traveled. There was a story, I don't know if any of you have read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. I read it as a senior in high school many years ago. And there's a passage that I remember so distinctly, which is riding in the higher dimension in the mountains. And he was saying that the air is thin there and very few people travel there. Yeah, such a great book. And, you know, as a 17-year-old, this was very eye-opening to me. And I related to it so much that there's the higher levels of elevation and the higher levels of our own minds. And to explore that really is the road less traveled. And it takes a fair amount of courage to do that. We often discover aspects of ourselves that we didn't know. We'll talk about that in a couple of sessions around shadow. But there's something profoundly empowering about understanding our own personal operating systems and what contributes to how we are, what we think about, how we react in certain situations. And in the absence of self-awareness, in a way, we are just reacting and responding to the stimuli of our lives somewhat unconsciously. And with that, with self-awareness of what is making us tick, what's going on there, we have much more conscious choice and intentionality of how we respond. So Matt, you want to jump in here? You're muted.
Thank you. The process of self-awareness, that I think I like what you said, is that it is a lifelong commitment to our own personal development. I recently had the experience where I had a really intense moment and faced some adversity, and in a flash, I kind of had an awakening. I changed. I became deeper. I became more mature. Became more grounded, really dropped into a deeper level of myself. And what I realized, which was very humbling, was that only could have occurred with 22 years of personal development. And you know, that is both we chuckle sometimes, humbling, and we can be cynical about that inch by inch we know ourselves more. And that the journey of self-awareness is the journey into the dark woods, knowing that we're going to face discomfort, that we're going to face the brambles, and knowing that in the cave we fear to enter lies the gold that we seek, right? In the words of Joseph Campbell. And so we know that the journey of self-awareness is the journey of understanding ourselves. And as Warren Bennis said, becoming a leader is about becoming more of ourselves. And this is something that is very ancient. Know thyself was over the entrance at the Oracle at Delphi 2,500 years ago. And indeed, it's one of the things that humans have been wrestling with since the dawn of consciousness, and in all the major religions. And then finally, the psychology of the last 100 years is trying to unpack what is consciousness and what is self-understanding and what are the dimensions of internal self-awareness and out. And it's really not an academic process. We really see it as deep and simple but profound inquiry into who we are in this life and where we are going. These three questions, I first came upon them with our friend from the Training Warrior Monk. The first question that we all have to wrestle with is, who are you? And it's a great journal prompt to do that for 5 minutes. Just answer the question of who are you and see what comes. It's like peeling an onion. Also good to do with a partner, by the way, where you ask each other, go back and forth. Who are you? What are the dimensions of your identity? Who are you at your depth, underneath that layer, underneath that layer? How would you answer this question? And from what lens? And then the next one is, where are you going? Meaning, what is this life about for you? And what is your purpose? And what are you here to do? Where are you traveling to? And then the third one is, with whom? What relationships and community consciously do you want to surround yourself with to allow yourself to live and lead in a way that has wholeness and also impact? And so these three questions a lot of the time underpin a lot of our work with leaders, understanding that we're essentially wrestling with these three questions in every coaching session that we have. And in their simplicity is great depth. Now, what we talked about last time with evolutionary consciousness is that the universe started with simple matter, and there's some impulse that drove the elemental table to get built out from simple to complex. And as consciousness became aware of itself, as matter became aware of itself, the process of evolution is now speeding up exponentially. We can actually participate in evolution by self-reflecting. It accelerates the process. As a wave breaks, right? Matter is aware of matter. The stars are contemplating the stars. And what happens in that is we're directing it is something that is truly profound. And we know being self-reflective isn't automatically what we know traditionally about leaders, because still many of our model of leadership are command and control, or military leaders, or dictating, or having the answers. And so we can look throughout history to say who were reflective leaders. And there are examples, right, of leaders that were evolutionary, that were both impact driven in the world, but also reflective about human nature themselves and about their own human nature. One was Marcus Aurelius, who wrote a book called Meditations, famous part of the Stoics, which are actually coming into vogue again. He wrote much of this in the battle lines in Bohemia, early in the Roman Empire, and was not only just a Roman Empire, but was deeply reflective about the nature of humanity. And that book is a very profound inquiry that came from his humility of the breadth of leading millions of people across an empire. And instead of being intoxicated by that, he was humbled, and it forced him to realize the weight of the stewardship of that many people and what that meant about humans, and what that meant about leading other humans. And there's a lot of other leaders that we know that are not necessarily, those kind of famous leaders. John F. Kennedy writing Profiles in Courage. There's leaders that we know that you grew up with in your life. This woman is named Dr. Graciela Italiano Thomas. She was the first CEO of Los Angeles Universal Preschool. I met her when I moved to Los Angeles. She then went on and worked at the Gates Foundation, leading Thrive by Five. She has her doctorate, speaks 4 languages, and escaped the Uruguayan resistance. And she used all of the adversity that she had to not only teach and lead about education, but she was a profoundly self-aware and deep person, and used her awareness of her own humanity to enable and enroll others into their own fullness. And when you were in the room with her, not only were you aligned to, where she was leading the organization, but your heart was full. And she encouraged you to be yourself, to inquire who you were and bring that fullness in. Transformational impact on all the people that she led. We all have people like that. So Janet, I'll pause and allow you at this moment if you want to jump in.
Yeah, I don't know that I have anything to add at this moment. Keep going.
So one of the things that we talk about is the journey of self-awareness goes into areas that we are unaware of. And there's subtle energies that, maybe we don't pay attention to. And sometimes they're just emotions that live in our body, or thoughts that we repress. There is an aspect of being self-aware that really is like magic. And that's when we say someone is wise. A lot of time it's just they're attuned to themselves and the other. And self-awareness can be both internal and it can be external, reading, quote, the room, right? Sometimes we call it social sensitivity. And so this is called the Johari window. It's well known in behavioral science. Despite its mystical name, comes from 2 guys, Joe and Harry, although I do believe it means jewel in Sanskrit, which is ironic. That was not intentional. And it just describes how there's aspects that I know about me and that you know. And then there's other parts about me that I don't know, that you can see. And it's maybe I show up in a meeting when I'm activated, and you can see in me something that I'm not aware of, like an edge I have, or a sarcasm, or a tone of voice, ways I show up that are really unconscious, and I would say, I think we would all say, very useful for others, and to find ways to illuminate our blind spot. There's also things that I don't talk about, parts of my past, things I don't feel as good about, that I hide, that I know that you don't know. Maybe they pop up into stress and we can see them. And then there's the vast unknown that neither of us know. It is said that this is the majority of our consciousness, and also one of the reasons why it's important to have deep practice. This also pops its head up into our blind spot when we get activated, and into our hidden, impulses, thoughts, and awarenesses that happen that surprise us sometimes. And so what we seek to do, and what we seek to help leaders do, is to open that window. The goal is to widen the window. And the way we do that is by sharing, by vulnerability, by accessing our depth, so we are known, so people know who we are, where we're going, and with whom. And then the other side, the x-axis, is by being open to feedback, by being in relationship with others and having feedback loops that are reflective, that can help us access parts of our blind spot. Really critical and fundamental in the process of leadership development, as we work with others. And it is transformational generally, not only, in your leadership, but also in your humanity.
Matt, let me jump in there for just a second, going back to that. When we work with executive teams, particularly the sharing piece, can feel sort of unusual in the context of a business relationship. And I'm thinking of some exercises, Matt, that you and I actually have co-facilitated with executive teams, one of which we call knee to knee, where we invite team members, executive team members, to sit literally knee to knee, facing each other, and each share the prompt of things would be better between us if so there's some level of self-awareness required there of, I'm aware of whatever different behaviors I have, of whatever that is, and sharing that and giving some of that vulnerability and acknowledging something about myself. And things would be better between us if which is a form of feedback. And that can be a really powerful exercise and experience to have with team members, or even at home with spouses or friends or whoever is really meaningful. So, and something, we've seen is how that can really deepen a connection and sense of trust, which enables you to accomplish together whatever it is you're setting out to accomplish. So that's a way to apply these two axes of sharing and sharing and feedback.
And it's important, as we're talking about, like there's a monastic metaphor for self-awareness, across the spiritual traditions. I'm thinking, actually, being from Minneapolis, there's a place called de Montreville, which is, I think, a Jesuit retreat center where you do silent retreats. And you think of the hallmark of a meditation retreat is silence, and essential silence, not only when you are on the seat. And what that allows access to are all of these things about ourselves that we can unlock. And a lot of times self-awareness is primarily reduced to, we'll talk about emotional intelligence and reactive patterns and having better social sensitivity, but it's also the deep listening into what your purpose is. And when I slow down and I get quiet and I inquire within and give myself the opportunity to become aware of what really lives in my heart, I find powerful things that compel me, compelling purposes that are fundamentally what people follow, things that are highly motivational, that activate kind of the emotional core of the brain, that actually drive behavioral science. And we know that the limbic resonance that happens when we emote, others emote, right? Our limbic system lights up, their limbic system lights up. To access that kind of vision and purpose, it takes time and practice. And so it's about being more self-aware so we can have a better impact on people, but it's also having a better impact in the world. And I think, the other thing that, Janet, I think it's also important to talk about is the different kinds of energies and the way self-awareness can actually come across as magic and wisdom, and the true power of it. When people say like that person is so wise, or they're so sharp, or they sit in a meeting and they knife through what we're talking about and they get to the core of something. I don't know about you, but I really think like the core of that is this deep sense of embodiment and stillness, where they're able to both see inside of themselves and outside of themselves what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a good question too. I don't know how to pronounce that name, Benin, or of where do you draw that line between appropriate sharing and oversharing in a way? And there's no simple answer to that. And part of that, I think, depends on context. So if you're in a business setting, there is a line there where it might be too much sharing. But again, it depends on context. The level, I have seen teams where the container is so strong that there really is a deep sense of intimacy. So this is probably not a very satisfying answer, but it really depends on context. I don't have any straight rules for that.
Yeah, not to be too meta, but the more self-aware you are, the better, you'll be able to calibrate yourself to the subtlety of that.
Exactly.
Because, people will reduce that to just like be, radically honest or not. I tend to encourage people to err on the side of authenticity. Jim literally just typed that as I said that, err on the side of sharing. Never heard it said that way, but I say err on the side of authenticity, even if it creates a little bit of a mess. However, I think of the robot in the movie Interstellar, where it was like 100% honest and they dialed it back to 90%. I mean, the do no harm principle is really important, and honesty to what end, right? Is it my own indulgence? Is it because I just want to get my feelings out? But authenticity is really binding for people. Leaders, people follow leaders that are vulnerable and aware of themselves. People connect to humanity. It's one of the things, because of our social neurons and our programming, very, very powerful. But different contexts require have a slightly different form of norms that we need to attune to. And the more aware I am of myself and the more radar I have for the room and for others, and that only comes like when I'm spinning like a top, right? I'm not aware of that, and I can't calibrate, and I miss the subtlety. And it's really hard. And we're going to also do a session on essentially executive presence, by the way. We're calling it something else. But this is a hallmark of executive presence, right? When you get very high and you're leading lots of people, those people that are very savvy, that this is one of the things that they have. So, and they know how to do well. Okay, so let's keep going. Janet, what do you think? Sound good?
Yeah.
All right. So the body of work around emotional intelligence that preceded Dan Goleman, Mayer and Salovey actually were before that, just like everything else, just like Tesla and Edison, by the way. But that landmark book, Emotional Intelligence, and then the body of work that's come after that is really a profound movement in the world. If you really think, it's only about 20 years old, and emotional intelligence as coursework did not exist in MBA programs until about 10, maybe 15 years ago. And so it's the study that and what the research shows, if you like look at Talent Smart and some of these other organizations, is that people that make it to the top of organizations have higher degrees of emotional intelligence. And in fact, it's more important than their technical ability in a lot of cases. There's also a cynicism about that, where it's like the Dilbert boss that is, quote, a good manager, but doesn't really know what they're doing. And I think that's a little bit more subtle, because if you're truly self-aware, you're aware of your gaps, you know what you're good at, you're able to kind of, there's a lot of disembodied, but good speaking leaders out there. And the self-aware ones are deeply in their body, and you can just tell there's a magnetism about them. And it really is this understanding of not just their emotions, everything else, as Janet led us through in the meditation, their mind, their body, even spiritual elements. So this body of work is a really foundational and easy access point with leaders. And it just shows that it's just another 2x2 here, that there's personal subjective competencies, my own self-awareness. You can't see that. It's highly subjective, what I'm aware of, but I can feel it. And then at the social dimension, there's a social awareness. Like I have a radar, I can read people's affects in their face, and boy, that comment bombed and the room is tense. And I can kind of use all those things. And the more I can feel the room being tense, the more agency I have as a leader to work with it. And then similarly in the objective column, right, there's aspects that you can see of how I manage myself, what behaviors, the language I use, my own affect in my face. And then similarly, the process I use in engaging with other people, how often I meet with my network, my active process of relationship management. And all of these things, fit together, and there's a lot of depth in it, but the mastery of being, leadership is the study of humans and how humans move together. And the most important human to start with, of course, is yourself. And so this process, we encourage you, most people probably here, have read Goldman's book. So all right, so we're just going to do a little bit more context, and then we actually have some inquiry practices that we're going to lead you through, just as an example of the reflective, inquiry-driven nature of self-awareness. But we say leading from the inside out, another one kind of evolution classic by Kevin Cashman, right? This is the principle here. It is operating from the inside out, using that witness that you have of your thoughts, your feelings, of your body, your physical sensation, the room, all of those kind of things. And you're able to kind of bring that out, right, inside out. And in that, we understand that when we begin to self-inquire, we use this term that we all have a leadership operating system. And this is all of the different filters and experiences that really power our hardware in how we show up in our body and our behaviors. This is that inner subjective aspect of our nurture and our nature. And the journey of becoming a leader is to dive deep and be able to understand and articulate the leadership operating system at depth and subtlety. And so as Walt Whitman, to paraphrase Whitman, we contain multitudes. When we say get to know your leadership operating system, there is a danger in reducing people to their Myers-Briggs type. Certain organizations will put their personality profile on their outside of their cubicle, and then that becomes the filter in every single action. This person is an ENFJ, and that is the only thing that's used to understand and relate to that other person, when that's only one facet of the diamond of that person's operating system. You are so subtle, and understanding the subtle curvature of your soul is something that takes a lifetime, because there are so many different dimensions.
Yes, one of the most powerful frames that I encountered some years ago along the lines of multitudes is that we have different parts of ourselves that respond differently. Part of myself wants to do this, part of myself wants to do that, and often they are in contradiction with each other. And many of us have this sense, like Matt, you were talking about, of almost feeling kind of crazy when that happens, of like, what's going on? And as if we're supposed to be this one singular being. And what I've found with myself and with clients is that to the extent that we can relax into, on some level, I have multiple parts of myself, sub-personalities that are sometimes in conflict, and get curious about that, that becomes a trailhead of self-exploration that is endless and profoundly useful. And part of understanding these different parts of ourselves and where they come from and what our personal operating system is looking at all these different factors that contribute to our operating system. So, obviously one of them is our genetics. What are our genetic predispositions? And sometimes it's totally uncanny and at times very uncomfortable to notice, oh my God, I'm just doing this thing or saying this thing that my mother said. I can't believe that. What is that? So that's a certain kind of disposition, but there's so many things that enter into. And so these are just some that we'll list and maybe explore a little and encourage you to engage in your own self-inquiry. So for example, your family of origin, this, goes back to the beginnings of psychotherapy and psychology and psychoanalysis of, well, who's your mother? Who's your father? What birth order are you in? If you have siblings, how did that impact you? What are the stories and experiences you had just from your family of origin? And that's an entire depth arena to explore and mine, many of us, for the rest of our lives. Of course, there's also quite a bit of research on personality traits that, there's whatever, I think 5 major traits, and we exist on different spectrums of those. So what are those for you? One that I'm thinking of for whatever reasons now, there's actually a trait that's agreeable and disagreeable. Do you tend to be just kind of by nature an agreeable person or disagreeable? Culture, of course, and family story, biography. I'm half Asian, biracial, and that has a huge impact on me. There's sort of Asian cultural things that I have grown up in, and Asian American, and also the history of immigration. But of course, I grew up in Northern California in the 20th century, and how does that impact who I am? Life experiences, traumas, etc. So there really is this incredible exploration of the universe of you that contributes to your operating system, and relaxing into the great mystery of what's not known to yourself and not known to others, that it really is a trailhead to explore these different parts of you, and a really important part of that self-awareness that then allows you to relate to yourself and your world in ways, again, with intentionality and empowerment.
One of the things that you said, Janet, that I think is important is when we are born, we're really born whole. And as our ego structures, our psyche develops, things will happen. It can be in our family, it can be in the culture, right? If you think of wholeness as it's like a fist, and as something painful happens, a message arises inside of us that's associated with the feeling. And then, as Janet said, that part of ourselves gets split off, right? It splits. And so that part is a subpart of our psyche that sometimes comes up and drives the bus and is driving behavior, and we're not really aware of it. And the goal is to go back and bring that part back in from exile, back into wholeness. And so that's why it's a great journaling exercise to say, what part of me is showing up now? And a big mind is a process that, for example, it's a meditative process where you get to know all these parts. There's a visualization and parts work around this conference table that you have inside of you with all the king and the little boy, and they're all vying for attention. And it's not about getting rid of them, but it's about integrating them, right? To become kind of more whole. And as Janet said, there's just so many multitudes and that kind of understanding. It takes a long time. And we get a question a lot about, how is this different from therapy? How is leadership development different than therapy? I don't know about your answer, Janet, but mine usually is, I think his name is Manfred Ketz de Vries. He's from Switzerland. He's a coach and also a therapist. And when he talks about coaching, we do these clinical spikes. We don't stay stuck, but we go, and then we come back out. And it's really about, I'm showing up this way in this place. And then we'll say, what's that about for you? And we'll unpack it a little bit. And sometimes we get into a sense of projection on the other person, or something that their parent told them, or some aspect of their depth that really does have qualities that you would explore. And so it's really important to know that you're in your depths, right, lie your liberation. And we will use that, but it's always in service in leadership, especially around the impact that you're trying to have in the world. So. Okay, so Janet, I'll jump back in here and allow you to take it to the next.
Yeah, so one of the most challenging self-awareness practices or inquiries can be our common reactive patterns. So that we have these different parts of ourselves. And a lot of them, we'll talk more about this in a couple of sessions around shadow, but for now, let's just define it briefly as parts of ourselves that we hide, repress, or deny, or we could even add that we don't even know are there. And so as Matt was saying, often through just our life experiences or whatever, different parts of ourselves can get kind of split off and become unconscious. And many of us have experienced this, where when we're not bringing awareness and light and integration to these aspects of ourselves, they can come out in kind of sideways ways, which are reactive behaviors. And those can range. Sometimes we often think of like acting out shadow, acting out these parts of ourselves in kind of aggression or hostility or something like that. But they can also be really passive, like withdrawal or just getting confused. So for those of you who are listening and not looking, we have a slide up here with lists of reactive patterns. You know, you can kind of take your pick of which ones tend to be yours. But part of self-awareness, especially as a leader, because when you're in a leadership position, your impact on people is really big. It can be on your particular team, it can be on the entire organization. And one could argue, especially in the tech industry, the products you develop and the impact that you have arguably globally on all 7 billion of us and the environment, which is why we feel evolution, evolving as a human in a leadership role is so important. And this is a really important part of this self-awareness, is to recognize what are the reactive patterns that I go into when I'm threatened or whatever, something's happening and I'm feeling triggered, or some part of me is driving the bus that is definitely not the one that should be driving the bus. So just as a kind of random sampling here, that intimidation, domination, I might go into that, or I need to be right, like I'm right and you're not. So that's self-righteousness. I might get really controlling, like I'm going to restrict the flow of information and kind of withhold things as a way to manipulate the situation and have it come out good for me. There's also, like I said, there's also the self-reactive patterns that are less aggressive, but they're still reactive. There's still parts of you that might, or parts of us that might be driving. Withdrawal might be one. So I'm just going to lean back and let everyone else hash this out at the table. There could be cynicism or despair, like whatever, forget it. Cynicism is such a huge thing, especially in business and in the world today. One of my favorite teachers talked about different forms of laziness. There's kind of sloth, laying around, doing nothing. There's busyness, which is a form of laziness, of just being too busy to even be present and aware. But the third one that he named is actually cynicism and despair, that's a form of laziness, of not being present and aware. So that can be one. And this one was also really interesting. Sometimes acting confused or feeling confused itself can be a self-reactive behavior, almost a self-protective behavior. So this is really worth inquiring about, of where do I go when I'm under stress or feeling under threat? What parts of me are activated and how do they respond? And to the extent that we can face these with courage and explore, well, where did that come from? What do I know about this? And often therapy is a good place to do that. That's when we can really begin to make a transformation. And this links back to one of the models we shared in the very first session, which is be, do, have, traveling the you, of going down into really looking at that core operating system. What are my core beliefs? What are my core operating principles and parts of myself? And to the extent that I can integrate and heal those, then I can then take new actions and receive new results. So Matt, I know you want to say something about this traveling the you as well.
Yeah, I think just, really well said, but just to emphasize that self-awareness precedes transformation, that when you sit down and begin meditating, you realize how neurotic you are. When you are sobered by the impact you have in the world, if you look on the left column, right, there is an element of like, wow, didn't realize that I was having that result, on people. And sometimes feedback, and there's this moment, and then even below that is, where does that come from? And that's when you get into your diamond-like operating system. And this is also where emotion is trapped. When you realize that you're operating from a place of anxiety, that is really operating from a place of shame, that has this self-critical narrative that you don't deserve to be in the seat, that you're going to fail, and that no one is going to follow you, right? Real example, underneath a complex graduate degree and a complex presentation, it's like these core root of the earth beliefs. And all of a sudden there's emotion trapped with that. And we learn where that came from and how they carried it, and then what might be true, right? And then in that place, what's true and what are you committed to, right? And a lot of people lead in the world where they're leading in a way that it allows not only themselves to heal, they're lancing their wound, so to speak, with their actions, and then allows them to give a gift, right? How do I want to show up? And have I also given myself the dignity of quiet reflection in, who I am, and blessing myself in the generative parts of my life and leadership, and then how I want to show up in the world as actions, and what that means about what I want to create, and ultimately why people would follow me. So we're going to go into just a few lines of inquiry that are just a few examples of this process, and then we're going to end again with another self-awareness practice and send you off on your way.
Yeah, so these are questions, there's so many self-inquiry questions one could begin with or continue to explore. These are just a few samplings. So for those of you who have journals, we're just going to give a little bit of time, but we really encourage you to take this to heart and actually give yourself the luxury of some time for self-exploration. That's also something, as I was saying, one of the ways that we can be lazy is we're busy. We have too many other more important things to do than become present and aware. So I encourage you to not be lazy and to take some time even beyond this session. But for now, we'll just populate them. Stephanie can write them in the chat so you can do them later. But for now, I think what I want to invite you to do is we'll just spend a little bit of time on each of these. And I want you to, my invitation is to just write down some different words. So not prose, but just words that come up, almost like poetry, or like those little poetry magnet things. Like, what are the words that come up? So taking a deep breath. First question. What wound did you get from your parents? What wound of theirs do you carry? So if you have a journal and a pen, you can jot down a few words. If you don't, you can hold this as a contemplative meditation and notice what arises, awareness of words that arise, also perhaps awareness of body sensations or emotional tone, feeling. What wound did you get from your parents? What wound of theirs do you carry?
The question has depth in the sense, a question in the chat, they impacted you, creating a wound. Children live their parents' unlived lives. Wounds are passed down through generations. And if you can literally picture yourself holding out of love a wound that your parents had that you are now carrying, that's not yours, that's theirs. Right. So that's the difference. They impacted you, creating a wound. And then there's also aspects of your operating system that are really the wound that has traveled to you from your parents, that is really theirs from their life or even before. And a wound is a self-limiting belief, an activation pattern, a part of your shadow, part of your operating system you would qualify as potentially negative, although that word isn't appropriate because broadly inclusive, they just are, but maybe they're painful.
And I can give a kind of a personal example, but one that probably applies to many. For example, if one's parent experienced some form of neglect, either intentional or unintentional, and these can be highly traumatic situations or even not, just having, grandparents being busy trying to keep food on the table. And that led to, one of our parents feeling like they didn't have that attention. There can be this wound of, am I okay? Am I safe? Will anyone be there for me? So we might have deep in our operating system and often subconscious that the world's not okay, that there's really going to be no one there for me and I have to do it myself. And that can manifest at work. Like I have to do everything because I can't trust anyone to execute on this thing. So you can see how these seeds of intergenerational stuff can also become part of our operating system as well. So that's just a simple example. So let's move on. And again, I encourage you to come back to these and give yourself, like I said, the permission to not be lazy and to spend some time here. Next inquiry is, what is your heart's deepest longing? And again, don't overthink this. Notice what happens. Bring awareness to your body, your breath, your emotional state. Notice what words arise as you hold this contemplative question in your mind. What is your heart's deepest longing? If you have a pen, let the pen write. If you're just contemplating, just notice what arises. Words, images, body sensations. What is your heart's deepest longing? Part of self-awareness is connecting with our sense of purpose and vision for our lives, not just our woundology. And the next question, what stories do you tell yourself that aren't true? What stories do you tell yourself that aren't true? This one's a tough one because usually the stories we tell ourselves we're convinced are true. Life is hard. That's really true. That can't possibly be a story I just tell myself. So this requires some real open-mindedness and learning mindset of what are the stories you tell yourself that aren't true or may not be true. And this may go to what your core beliefs are that you are pretty convinced are true. So bringing awareness to those stories that you tell yourself. We are a storytelling species, and we often confuse stories with truth.
Mm.
And in fact, it might be a useful exercise to break these into two, this one into two. What stories do you tell yourself first? So just think of those. What do you hold as true? And then the second part of it, Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a wonderful Zen teacher, was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize by Dr. Martin Luther King. When you go on retreat with him, there's usually a big banner in his calligraphy that says, "Are you sure? Are you sure?" So what stories do you tell yourself that may not be true? Again, bringing awareness, even in this moment, to what happens in your body and your emotional state, even just hearing these questions. Next one, how does your cultural lineage show up in your leadership? How does your cultural lineage show up in your leadership?
These can be cultural dimensions that can include things like gender orientation, that can include class, that include where you are from, your origins.
Religious and spiritual upbringing.
Age, even.
A lot to unpack in this one.
It's important to note there's a belief that we are as programmed by the systemic forces that shape us as by the intrapsychic, right? The things inside of us. And so we're all a product of different systems in the culture.
Right, our social context has often profound impacts on us that usually we're not aware of until we really start following this trailhead. Next one. Why should people follow you? And why shouldn't they? So again, if you're journaling or even if you're not, what words arise in answer to these questions? Why should people follow you? Why shouldn't they? And you can bring awareness to, do you tend to err on the side of arrogance? They should follow me because I'm wise and I know. Or sometimes people tend to swing to what one of my friends called the pipsqueak complex. Why should people follow me? Well, I don't know, they shouldn't follow me. What do I know? Who am I to be glorious and fabulous? So just bringing awareness to where you tend to fall or even swing. Sometimes there's a bipolarity that between people should follow me because I'm wise and I know, and then, oh my God, who am I? I'm nobody. And again, it's about bringing awareness to your operating system and your tendencies and the different parts of you. Different parts of you will have different answers to these questions. And finally, for today, what is your deepest purpose? What are you doing? Are you aware of your deepest purpose? Have you given yourself the time to contemplate this question appropriately? Or are you too busy? So again, these are just a sampling of many questions of self-inquiry one could follow. And I encourage you to think of them as trailheads, that these are trailheads that you can then begin to wander down. Which parts of me have different answers to these questions? Where does that come from? What stories am I running? Many of our clients are tech clients, so software analogies are, perhaps cliche, but they also work really well. What is the code that's running that I didn't necessarily write or intend? It's just running in my background as my operating system, and I don't even know. And to the extent that I can become aware of that, I can attend to that code and rewrite some of it.
Yes, this is the journey of the two roads, and being willing to take the one that may be a slightly more unknown for the prize at the end of a life of fullness and wisdom. And if you'd like to explore those questions more and more, this training, this experience really in Maui is filling up, and it is essentially a journey of self-awareness and transformation, where we will ask you the deepest questions that one can ask about their life, and then put you in an experience around them. We also, August 26th to the 28th, are doing a meditation training called Restore on our website as well, that you can come journey with us and sit in silence and explore in a way these questions as well. So just in 30 seconds, allow your eyes to shut and just to go within and feeling yourself back in a posture of stateliness and nobility, and just quiet, and go and find inside of yourself that subtle curvature of your soul. You are multitudes. The diamond-like quality of your operating system, becoming aware of feelings and your physical body, thoughts that are arising and spinning, becoming aware of your environment and the subtle energies around you, maybe that are beyond even your senses. The continuum of noise, all the way to spiritual level and transpersonal connections, feeling around you the world and even the universe. Feeling the universe and your own. Nice easy breath. opening your eyes. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time on our journey as we explore meditation and mindfulness. Lovely messages. Have a great week ahead of you.